What's Mark doing now? All right, hello everyone, welcome. So glad to have everyone with us here today and some guests as well. We'll get to that in a little bit, but we are behind because I'm late coming in here. I do want to say, for the benefit of those who are watching us online and will not hear our prayer concern time, that our beloved class member Sue Facette died this week. Yesterday morning.
At 5:20.
Yeah, and her service will be here on Saturday at 10 o'clock, and I'll be officiating that. So this Saturday in the chapel at 10 o'clock. Yeah, and that will be in the note as well. So do remember to pay attention to that. What a great group we have here. Just we're coming back, and it's lovely to see.
That front row is scary.
Yeah, I know. Well, I think part of the problem is that front row is really close this time, and y'all don't trust me.
It's like it's gonna eat
Right,
you up.
it's sort of a barrier row, right? It's not really for seating, it's just for scaring people off. It gives you the sense. Now, see, that's much better.
Keep you safe from us.
I don't think even my projectile spit can make it that far.
You and Clinton.
Oh, God. That's where I got COVID.
So, I think that's where you got COVID. Yeah, thanks for that. Okay. So we're doing our study of Ruth, and we're following this book.
Here come our youth.
Oh, wait, come on in. We got some youth to make an announcement. Come on in.
Youths.
Y'all come up here.
All right.
I'm going to leave you on the live stream too.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So, good morning, everyone. We're here with the youth choir to talk to you about the spaghetti lunch and silent auction. And so it's to fund or partially fund the youth choir mission trip to Denver. That's where we're going this year. And so it contributes to about 30% of for the paying for the trip. And it's a really great opportunity for all of us to go out in different communities and serve and also sing in hospitals and churches and just do community service. And so you can come to the lunch. Obviously, it's open to everyone. There will be two seating, one at 11 a.m. for those of you who go to the early service, and then one at noon for those of you who go to the later service. But if you can come, you can also donate. I have contribution agreements, so you can donate things for the auction, and no item is too small. So examples would be like tickets to sporting events, like concerts or vacation lake homes, gift cards, professional services. But we do ask that the items are new. And yeah, so we would appreciate it if we all had your support for our trip to Denver this summer.
Could you tell us all of your names?
I'm Christopher. I'm a senior.
Give us last names so that we put you with the family.
Because I think I had you in third grade choir.
Excuse me.
Pardon me?
Where are you going?
Grandmother.
All right, that was a bring fire for me. Right? So one of the things I've discovered, I noticed this morning, I was watching the youth choir in the 9 o'clock service. I'm trying to survey everyone, and having not seen most of these kids in 2 years, you know, I was like, like Mr. Oni. I was like, I said to Ross's parents, I said, who is that kid on the end over there? I can't figure out who that is. And they're like, oh my God. Right?
Okay, go
Yeah.
ahead and give us your
Okay,
names.
Ross Granberry.
Yes, I had him in third.
Okay.
Felix Guthrie.
Yeah,
Joseph Guthrie.
I had Joseph.
David Oni.
Pardon me?
David Oni.
Okay, yes, I had David.
All right.
That must
All
have
right. Thank you very much. Yeah, you guys did a great job. All right. Choir's doing it this morning too.
I had at least 3 of them.
In 6th grade.
All right. Welcome, y'all. Okay.
All right. And there is no cost. They like for you to tip them There is a tip thing on the table for you to tip them.
All right, so youth choir, spaghetti luncheon, and silent auction. Back to the old days.
Actually, the Sunday before Easter.
Okay.
It is April the 6th or something like that. They
Yeah, I believe that's right.
I think
Yes, Caroline.
I was gonna say Kathy's back with us.
Yes, and Kathy's back with us.
It is the 10th of
The
April.
10th of April. Okay.
I think she doesn't know the dangerous.
You can donate online. Yes.
And I have, if you have something you want to donate, I've got forms.
All right, back to our regularly scheduled lesson. We're talking about Ruth. And we're actually going to get into the text of Ruth today, but there's a funny story I need to tell you first. Because, well, some of you may know this story, but I'm going to set it up in a personal way as well. So my middle name, if you want to steal my identity, is Lee, Mark Lee Wingfield.
How about your mom's? What's your mom's name?
Yeah, do you want my social security number as well? Yeah. Okay. You're not going to get far, but anyhow, my mother, her father, my maternal grandfather, was known as TL. Everyone knew him as TL. My mother thought the L stood for Lee, and she was naming me Mark Lee after him. Well, it turns out the L is not for Lee, it's for Lawson. And so I was misnamed, right? It's okay. I've not suffered much from it, right?
That sounds good, Mark Lawson.
Lawson, yeah. Maybe I should change my name. I don't know. So I tell you that by way of telling you there's a character in this book of Ruth called Orpah. O-R-P-A-H. And do y'all know who else is really named Orpah?
Yes.
Oprah Winfrey.
Yeah.
Except as the story goes, I don't know how true this is, but this is the official story, that people could never pronounce her name, and they kept getting it mixed up, and they called her Oprah instead of Orpah. Her mother named her after this biblical character from the book of Ruth, right? But no one could get it straight, and so we know her today as Oprah. Same letters, just rearranged. Right? Okay. Oh, actually, I want to begin with a poem. Where's my Kindle? Padraig Otuanga, who's the poet, who's written the chapter that we're working on today, which is chapter 2 in the book we're following. This is a poem that sort of goes along with that chapter. The title is, "And Isn't It True for All of Us?" And isn't it true for all of us that we need someone to watch us when we leave, and when we need to make our own way home, and when we're making something we can't see, or when we're shaping up to be a person that can feel 100 sorrows and still get through the day, who could dream 100 horrors and make it anyway? Isn't it true for all of us that we need a guiding other? Maybe mother, maybe lover, maybe nothing other than a stranger, who could see our fear and with kindness then unfold a welcome. Isn't it true for all of us that we need our secrets told, and that without another to bear witness to the children that were never born and would never be a grown-up, we would be alone and lost and cold? There would be childish hungers left inside of us, needing to grow old.
Well, that's depressing.
I didn't say it was all uplifting today, right? We're going to begin reading the first chapter of the book of Ruth. And one of the interesting things about Ruth is it's like a drama in 4 acts. It's like a 4-act play. And each chapter is an act, really. And so listen along as we read this beginning part. In the days when the judges ruled, now, and commentary here, this is placing this story in time. Later, not today, we're going to have a conversation about, is this story fiction or nonfiction? There's a separate case to be made for that, right? I will say the story of Ruth has the feel of an epic story, right? It is an everyman kind of story, or every woman kind of story, right? In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. Well, so remember that the judges, this was a period in Israel's history where there were not kings, but judges. And judges, this, you know, here in Dallas County and Texas counties, we call our county executives judges, and they're not really judges. It's just a word we use, right? They're really CEOs of the county, right? Well, this is like that. Judges in the Old Testament period were not truly judges. They were wise people. They were adjudicators, in a sense, but mainly they were leaders. They were visionaries who helped people with their disputes and provided leadership. But they weren't kings, and they weren't priests, really. But they also really weren't judges in the sense we use that word today.
Mark,
Yeah.
I hate to be cynical, but did they really help people? Or?
Yeah, no, they really did.
Oh.
So at their best.
Oh, okay.
Now, again, I'm sure like any elected official or any other leader, there's some who are better than others, right? And we find in the Old Testament stories of some tremendous wisdom from judges, and I'm sure not everyone was that wise. So it's a great question. So this is the setting, and then specifically there's a famine. So we're set in a place in time. A certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab. Now this is significant because Moab is adjacent, is another place. Clearly the famine is what's driving them away, right? But the Moabites and the Hebrews generally did not like each other and generally thought each other was unclean. More on that in a moment. Famine drives us to do things we would never otherwise do, right? He and his wife and 2 sons went. The name of the man was, and here's a great one, Elimelech. And the name of his wife was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons, who make an obligatory brief appearance in the story, Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. Now, it should not be lost on us that this story is happening in Bethlehem, which then comes to have later significance in the Christian story, right? This may be one reason that, well, that the story perseveres with us, right? They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These 2 Moabites took wives. I'm sorry, these sons took Moabite wives. So you have Hebrew sons taking Moabite wives, right? The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other, Ruth. When they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Now, think about how much we don't know about the details of this story at this point. And we're not going to know. We do not know what killed any of these people. We already have a body count of 3 within 5 verses of this story. 3 of the people we've just met are already dead.
We don't know how old the people are.
And we don't know how old they are. I mean, we can sort of surmise that if there had been 10 years lapse since maybe they got there, or since, we're not even sure if the 10 years is really, well, since when they had lived there about 10 years, About.
But the boys were old enough to marry.
Well, right.
But not until after Daddy died.
Yeah,
Yeah, so,
not till.
yeah, so they must have been teenagers, at least, whenever they moved,
Oh, yeah.
right? But people married younger then, and this is a story, right? So it may not matter, but what's fascinating about this narrative is we almost don't need to know these facts. They really don't matter, right? For those who like to analyze the text deeply, we might want to go and say, well, oh my God, he died of this disease, or and what are the odds that both the sons die, and all of these crazy things. We could dig deep into this, but the point is, it doesn't matter right now because there's a bigger story spinning out that we're going to pay attention to.
But the men were all died. They all died, so it's just the women.
It's just the
And
women.
back in those days, I don't know how the women survived. I guess they.
Well, this is the problem. This is the problem, right? Because without the men to support them in this culture, they are exposed. They are exposed, and so they've got to do something. So picking up in verse 6, here's what happens. So, speaking of Naomi, and by the way, it's interesting, the book is called Ruth, not Naomi. Okay? Then she started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had considered his people and had given them food. In other words, she heard that now the famine was past in Israel and she could go back safely.
Plus she has family there.
Right. In Bethlehem of Judea. So she set out from the place where she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. Now here's what's weird about this story. They're on the way, it says, and then Naomi says to them, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find security, each of you, in the house of your husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud. They said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they were grown?" This makes the poem seem a little happier compared to this. "Would you then refrain from marrying? No, my daughters. It has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me." Then they wept aloud again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, and here's the famous soliloquy, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Whither thou goest, I will go." NRSV says, "Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. For your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. So the 2 of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. Now, seriously? The whole town?
Maybe it was small.
So, I think this is one of those biblical phrases we've got to understand as being metaphorical or representative. This reminds me of people who come up to complain about something and say, "Well, other people are saying."
Yeah. Everybody says.
Everybody's saying. The whole town, probably not the whole town, but it does represent this larger group probably. Is stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" What? I mean, you can imagine, right? You can imagine someone who's been gone, who the people in the town knew. If you've ever lived in a small town, you can get the feel of this thing going on. And she says to them in this also dramatic speech, "Call me no longer Naomi. Call me Mara." Naomi means sweet, Mara means bitter. I'm no longer sweet, I am bitter. For the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full. Hear the irony, she went away because of famine. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. This is poetic, right? Why call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? So, here's the happy summary. So Naomi returned together with Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, who came back with her from the country of Moab. They came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. So again, we have a very specific time in mind. Even though we're lacking so many details, there are some odd details in the story that places it in time. This is curious, but it also helps us get a feel, and you can see as you hear this story, remember 2 weeks ago we talked about how so much of the Old Testament originated as oral tradition. Stories that were told over and over and over again. And as you hear this first act of the drama read, it reads like theater. You can tell how this was a story that was well honed and passed down. This is something you could memorize, just like Shakespeare, right? You can memorize this and recite it. You can see how that would happen with this, right? So much drama here in all of this. Let me pause before we get into what our study book has to say and say, what questions or comments do you have before we get into that? Anyone?
It's odd to me that you said it was odd that they were already leaving and then suddenly she says go back, which doesn't make sense. But the part that's odd to me is that if both girls loved her so much, how was she able to prevail upon one to leave and not the other? That's odd to me.
Well, there's several odd things about this story, right? Which is why, at the end of the day, my personal view is going to lean toward this is a fictional story told to tell a point, right? It may not matter. It's a good story. And it certainly, if it is fiction in that sense, it is set within a spiritual lesson, right? It's like an extended parable of Jesus.
Or it could be a fictionalized account of something that actually happened.
It could be that
because
it's so
sometimes
common, right?
It's been told so many times and people have changed the story so many
Exactly.
times.
Now, here's another thing interesting about this story. It's clearly set within the context of Judaism, but it does not mention God.
Nope. And, oh yeah, it does, because God turned against Naomi.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Well, it does mention God, but not really not in the sense that we would expect to be a Bible story. Carol Ann?
I was curious, when you said that just then about God,
Yeah.
she sent Orpah back to her family and her gods.
Yeah.
And that has always troubled me a bit, because that would be like us saying, well, go back to your Mormon church and, you know.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Naomi sends
Or your-
Orpah back to her own
Or
people's
your-
gods,
it's
right?
not-
Fascinating, right?
Weren't the judges
I'll
part,
stop you off.
wasn't part of their job to, wasn't this at a time when
Monotheism.
monotheism and polytheism was fighting it out, and judges were sort of there to try to,
Yeah, so the judges were somewhere between a prophet and a king. I mean, they weren't kings, they weren't technically prophets, but they helped highlight, as a chapter in the book today says, they helped highlight injustice, highlight hypocrisy. They called the people to follow God.
and
Right.
was this after the Ten Commandments or before?
Oh, well after, yes.
Yeah, so they did
Right.
have Jewish law.
Right, exactly. As the author here says, the judges were less arbitrators legislatively and more like leaders. They were leaders of the people. They were line captains.
But anyway, but I don't think it would have been that odd to say, go back to your.
Oh no, it still would have been.
Oh, it
Yeah,
would have been.
no, because they were very much calling people to faith.
Yeah.
and to faithfulness and to be set apart. But clearly, the daughters were converts,
Yeah,
right?
or at least Ruth was.
Right. Maybe the other one wasn't. So what we have here in this ancient story is what we would today call a mixed marriage, right? So this is not a modern concept, right? This goes way back, and so much of Judaism is about keeping like things together.
Yeah.
Go back to the Levitical code, and it's all about keeping like things together, and it's about separating from the world. And that's why this story is shocking in a way. Mm-hmm. And this is not the only reason the story is shocking, but this is one way that it is.
Well,
so,
excuse me.
Yeah.
In what I'm reading here, it says mother's house, the women's part of the home, but also perhaps the proper location for arranging marriage. So, could the daughter that went back to her mother have been more concerned about another marriage?
Yes.
Than staying with?
Yeah, well, and this is what Naomi's saying. She's saying, I'm paraphrasing here, I'm putting words in her mouth, but it appears that she's saying, you're young enough to find a husband again. You need to go back to your people where you're more likely to find a husband.
Right.
Right? And so if you go with me, you are dooming yourself to long-term widowhood because your prospects are going to be less. That's what she's saying in this. And this is why when Ruth says she's going to cast her lot with Naomi, it is not with the expectation that she's going to find another husband. It's the opposite, right? Now, yeah.
It just throws me how they can switch gods so easily, and your God shall be my God.
Yeah.
The other one is going back to their God, and it's almost like I was eating Jif peanut butter, and now I'm going to Peter Pan. It's so easy for them to.
We need some brand loyalty here.
Yeah, and notice they don't say the evil heathens of
Right.
like we would today talk about anybody other than our God.
So for those at home, Jim is asking a great question. He said it's shocking how quickly they seem to be able to change gods, right? There's two things about that that are important to the story.
No judgment on the
No judgment, which is shocking. That's the shocking part. Because all of the Old Testament is about bringing people to faithfulness to the one God, right? And here is a case where there's a book in the Bible where one of the main characters is blessing someone who goes back to the old gods, to another God. Now, the reason that's equally shocking is because the story is told from a Hebrew perspective, a Jewish perspective. So, why is that, right? I don't think we know, but I think it's told in a way to make Ruth look better.
Right.
Yeah.
In contrast.
But you know what? I have an Indian friend, and I was talking about our boss who was raised as a Hindu, but who married a Christian man and now takes her kids to church. And she was talking about, I said, but she's a Christian now. And she said, no, she's not. In India, everyone changes to the religion of their husband. But it doesn't mean you actually believe it. It just means you do it.
So there are certainly cultures, and this could be what's going on here, where culturally you switch to identify with the religion of the spouse, or in this case the husband. I don't want to dwell too much on this because it's sort of a minor. It's an interesting point, but it's minor. And by the way, we don't know who wrote this book. It doesn't matter really, right? We don't know who wrote this. Clearly, as I said before, it came down out of the oral tradition. And so I'm sure the originator of it is lost in here. But there is a universal story within this as well. So the plot here is a mix of things that can't be controlled, death, and things that can be controlled, where you're going to go afterward. So it's a story in a way about how do people respond when bad things happen to them. That's what we're finding here. We don't know much about Elimelech, and doesn't matter so much. Elimelech's name, the actual meaning of that word is "to me will come kingship," which is ironic because that clearly is not what happens here. His name is ironic, right? Naomi is overwhelmed. I mean, this is a story of a widow who is overwhelmed with the responsibilities that she has. And she wants to protect her daughters-in-law by putting them away from her. Because, again, she feels like God has turned the back on her. And their prospects would be better away from her. She's going to pack up and go back home, right? As I read this story, though, I keep thinking about, do any of y'all remember, this is an old movie, but the movie A Trip to Bountiful?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, it's a beautiful story, right? It has a beautiful soundtrack. This is where Cynthia Clawson is the soundtrack. Come home, you who are weary, come home, right? Which, by the way, was written here at Wilshire, that arrangement.
Wasn't that the guy named Brown?
Yeah.
Wrote it?
Yeah, who was a member here in the 60s and wrote it for her. And Softly and Tenderly, Jesus is Calling. Yeah, so there's another story. But the movie, is about this woman who's been taken away from her small town, and lots of time has passed, and basically she escapes. She wants to go back, and she thinks things are going to be the way they were, but she gets there and everything's dried up. There is no there anymore. And part of this story also reminds us of the longing for a home that may not still be a home. Now, this is painful, right? Because when we are in distress, when we feel like God has abandoned us, our impulse may be to want to go back to a place we once knew before. And often we find that place no longer exists. And this gives us some context for Naomi, because she also is going back to a place that is different than when she left it, right?
The story begins with a statement of fact that there was a famine in the land, and the thing struck me, and I have not looked this up or checked it out, but it seemed like to me that's a fairly frequent reference in the Bible.
Yes.
The famines that occur here. So it starts off on a rather glum note. If something is a famine bad enough to cause you to relocate, it must be pretty threatening. So I kind of get the impression that the people that day were living on a thread.
Yeah, so this is a fantastic point. I should have made this already. Thank you for that reminder. The story begins with famine as the motivator. Famine sets up what's about to happen. And this is a repeated theme in the Bible.
Yeah.
Think about Joseph.
Think about Abraham.
Think about Abraham. And it makes an interesting connection even to the gospel reading for today in worship, which is the story of Jesus in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights, forced on himself famine. And as George says in the sermon today, that becomes a spiritual catalyst for him. So here's a wonderful point, that it is the deprivation of food that causes us to seek succor somewhere else. And this is an issue that is prevalent in the world today. This is such a common, universal, motivating story. So today, right now, with this year, there are an estimated 281 million refugees in the world. Million.
And growing by the moment.
And we've added 1 million to that in the past week with people fleeing Ukraine, and it's going to increase. I mean, if the way things are going, the entire eastern side of Ukraine is going to be evacuated.
Isn't this the largest global migration
In history. We are living through the largest global migration in history. Now, you may not see that actually, if you look around, you'll see it, right? You have to pay attention, but the world sees it, right? 280, so let me give you a little context for that. The population of the United States today is roughly 330 million people. So imagine 85% of the population of the United States on the move away from home, crossing borders. That's a lot of people. It's spread out all over the world. And so much of this is in Europe and in Africa. I mean, we concentrate all of our attention on the southern border and Mexico and people coming up from Central America and South America and so forth. That's only a portion of the global story, because there's so much turmoil in other parts of the world that there are many more people leaving. And in Africa in particular, famine remains a motivator for this. A huge motivator. Political instability, dictators, autocrats, persecution of all kinds, all of these things are causing people to be on the move today in the greatest number we know in modern history, and probably in the history of the world, right? It's a bold statement because it's hard to document antiquity, but certainly, given the population growth, this seems possible. So is this story relevant today? Absolutely. And so the theme of the book is about borders and boundaries. And what we see here is at the beginning of this story about how we understand what it means to cross a border or a boundary. Most of us are fortunate enough not to have ever had to do this. But there are many of you sitting in this room who are widows or widowers. And you know what that feels like. That gives you an instant connection to this story, right? But we may have to place ourselves in the mind of someone who's fleeing a country for another because they want to live. And this is what caused Elimelech and Naomi and their sons to flee to Moab in the first place.
To a place where people they hated lived.
Where people they hated lived. Yeah. What time is it?
It is 10:39.
Oh my. Okay.
Our choir people.
This lesson was so riveting, I kept them, I guess. Yeah. Beyond the time. Well, I'm going to pause here because there's what I want to talk about next is more about how this relates. And if you're following along in the book, you know, there's a beautiful section here about how this relates to the conversation that they're having at the time of writing with people in Ireland who have left or crossed borders because of the Troubles or because of Brexit and all that goes on with as well. We're just beginning to set the stage for this, right? Beginning on this. And I know this seems like a slow walk, but what would you expect?
That's what we do.
Here, right? Typically, you know, most of the times we would teach the book of Ruth in 1 or 2 weeks because it's a simple story. But what I want us to do in these weeks we're studying is to get behind the story and find ways to identify with it ourselves. Because it is a universal story. I keep saying this over and over again, but we've got to find ourselves in it. And that may require us to imagine some things that we don't want to imagine. But I've been thinking this week about the people of Ukraine who are fleeing, the people I've heard, the people I've seen that you've seen as well. 2 weeks ago, that they had no concept this could be their life. And now they are fleeing their homes with whatever they can carry on their back. In a country where they never expected this would happen. And that ought to be shocking to all of us.
The thing that surprised me is that most of them are on foot.
Well, so a number of reasons for that. One, it's increasingly hard to get gas. And so, or to buy gas, right? It's hard to cross borders now. And so this story of border crossing we can't pretend that crossing a border is easy. I mean, it was easier in those days. You didn't have border, but literally, borders are being closed to people, right? And this is so important. If I say much more, we're going to be down a hole and we're out of time, right? Yes.
One thing I wanted to say today, I noticed on Facebook, there's a picture on a train station of Polish people. Women have left strollers, so the women and families that come in can have a free stroller.
Isn't that lovely?
Polish women leaving strollers at the train station so the people who are coming. Yes.
I think it's not something that any of us like to think about, but down the line, our descendants are gonna live in a world we would not even begin to recognize.
Yes.
For many reasons, climate,
Right.
all
Just as we live in a world our
grandparents
and
could not imagine.
great-grandparents couldn't have understood, right? The same is true, those who come after us, our ancestors down the line will as well. I've got to stop talking. Let's say a prayer for those who are with us, and then we have a number of prayer concerns to deal with today as well. By the way, in the church as a whole, I noticed in prayers of the people today, the number of deaths.
Yes.
I have no memory of another time we have had that many deaths in the congregation in 1 week as what we're praying for today. It was half the prayer. It was unbelievably long.
Wow.
Let's pray. Lord, in your mercy, grant us your grace today and help us to have ears to hear this marvelous story of redemption and courage and perseverance. And may we too have courage to face the challenges of this week and this day. We pray through Jesus Christ. Amen.
Yes.